Well, I appreciate everyone joining us today. I'm pleased to be with Treasurer Dillon and Harvey Hollins. Happy to discuss the city of Detroit. There's been a lot of progress, and I'm excited about the future. A couple things I would like to mention. First of all, I'd like to continue to express our best wishes to Mayor Bing and being back in the hospital, and hopefully he'll recover soon and stay on a positive path. It's always important to remember we've got real people here, and we want to see them do well. The next group I'd like to thank is the review team. The review team did a great job during this entire progress. And one thing I would mention is not just the consent agreement, but going back to their actual report. And I still encourage people to go back and review their report about the financial condition of Detroit. There is a lot of very good information in there to point out the severe financial distress the city's been through and continues to suffer from, and the need to do this. When you talk about deficits going back to 2005 of $155 million to over $300 million in each year, the challenge of accurately forecasting revenues, and a number of the other issues in terms of liabilities, grant making, there's much good information, and so I always try to recommend people get a factual basis by going back to the review team's report. Also, again, their work on the consent agreement was very helpful, and I appreciate their approval of that agreement yesterday. So that was a major step in this entire process. Beyond that, I also want to thank the mayor and city council, both the mayor and the deputy mayor and their team for their hard work in going through this process of putting an agreement together, and then the work of the city council and their approval of this yesterday. I know it's challenging. They had a lot of comments from the public, but as a whole, the city council did a very good job of doing an analysis review, and I appreciate their approval. The last group I would want to thank, and there are so many, is I also want to put my a shout out to Treasurer Dillon, to Andy and his team for a lot of hard work making all this happen. This was truly a collaboration between the city, the mayor, the city council, and the treasurer's office to put this agreement together. And I believe it is historic in the sense that if you look at the problems of Detroit, they go back for several decades. So this is not a new problem we've been facing with financial distress in the city. It's one that's been going on for decades. And I believe now this is the opportunity to say we're going to be part of the solution, and that we're moving forward in a positive way to solve the problems of Detroit. Our role is to do that as a supporting partner. Again, if you look at the agreement, the mayor and the city council are running the city of Detroit, and we're providing supporting resources. Talking about the future, one of the first steps we need to do that the agreement does call for is a number of staffing activities. We need to staff the Financial Advisory Board with 9 members. Each one of us, a number of different groups, have responsibility for appointing those members. We're already starting to look at potential candidates. There's also a need for a chief financial officer for the city and for a program management director. So all those activities are already getting kicked off in terms of we're starting to have discussions between Treasury and the city, the mayor's office, on how to do those things. So that's all very positive and constructive. What I'd also like to highlight, though, is the 3 pillars I always think are important to mention when we talk about the city. The future of the city should be based on a positive outlook, and that's really on financial stability, on better services to citizens, and on growing the city of Detroit. And I'm proud to say the agreement actually has an appendix that talks about a number of positive activities the state can be a partner in and helping do with the city of Detroit and hopefully other communities in Michigan. But we have already been working a number of those. We're going to continue to work on those. Some of those, just to give you a quick list of some of those activities, are things I mentioned in the public safety address, how we hope to have more Michigan State troopers available to help law enforcement in the 4 communities in particular that have the highest crime rates, but also good things like looking at mental health courts, drug courts, better things with probation and corrections, better programs for prisoner reentry, things like the Community Ventures program to help the structurally unemployed find jobs, at-risk youth programs, looking at the property situation in Detroit in terms of helping clear title on abandoned properties, and hopefully doing some legislation to really restrict who can buy properties off the tax rolls, in the sense that we don't want people that have either unpaid taxes or blighted properties continuing to purchase properties in the city. Let's get them to people that want to actually rehab those properties and hopefully live in them or put businesses in them. So public safety is a big portion that we already have a lot of activities going. Another area is on the transit side. We have made progress in terms of the Regional Transit Authority bills coming out of the Senate committee. So as they return from recess, hopefully we'll have an opportunity to see those bills move forward. Public lighting is a project we've been working with the city on for some time. We continue to work on that. And as I said, it's just a collaborative effort to work across the board on whatever areas we can help. Human services, the list goes on. So I'm not going to keep going down that list. I'm happy to answer questions or see if Andy or Harvey would like to add anything. But this has been a real team effort. It was much hard work on getting to an agreement. Now that we've gotten to an agreement, my answer is let's go. Let's go on better services for citizens, financial stability, and growing Detroit, which I view as a whole lot more exciting than working on a consent agreement or a financial stability agreement.
I agree. And I think we've always gotten along better with the mayor and his staff and city council than you might have read in the paper. It's always been a healthy dialogue and a good relationship. And I was glad Kirk Lewis called me today, and he's ready to go and put these folks in place so that we can start moving forward. And if you want to look at some of the good things that the governor was mentioning, look at Annex E. I mean, it's a pretty powerful document, and I want to compliment the governor's office because it was pretty much his team building all that list and putting things together. And I think it's opening day in more ways than one here in Detroit today because we can start talking about the good things rather than about financial, stress of the city.
With the mayor being in the hospital...
I don't know if Harvey wants to say something first.
No, this is a great day for the city. There's a lot more that we need to do in terms of making sure that the community's brought into it. We want their ideas for how we move forward and to grow the city. So we're excited about what the mayor and the city council has done over the last few days and weeks. It was a hard decision, but we're here now and we're ready to go forward. So.
With the mayor being in the hospital, how quickly do you think you can move forward to getting these appointees to the advisory board done?
Well, I think it's worked well so far with Kirk Lewis being deputy mayor, and he's in regular communication with the mayor. I was pleased to hear that I was getting reports that the mayor was active, involved, part of these discussions over the last couple days, even with going back in the hospital. So again, we want him just to get well. But as a practical mayor, I believe he's involved and active in this process.
Can you explain the vetting process for this advisory board in terms of what kinds of appointees would you make? Are these going to be accountants, or are you going to take civic leaders?
I like accountants, by the way. I don't know if I've ever said that before. No, there's a number of criteria Bank will lay in the agreement, as you can read. They have to have background in municipal finance, distress or troubled situations. There's a number of criteria there. And actually, there's kind of independent verification of their credentials as part of that process, either by the Michigan Association of CPAs or by the Government Executives Association. So there's a couple benchmarks there. So it's to have a cross-section of people. If you look at the appointees, Andy has one appointee, I have to appoint 3 people, and then we have a joint appointment with the city. So we're going to work hard on getting a good cross-section, but I would say financial background understanding is critically important because that's called for in the agreement, and I believe that's something that will be a value add to not just in terms of their work, but hopefully that can be good advice to give to the mayor, city council, and help the operations of the city. Again, it's not to tell them what to do most of the time. Hopefully it's just good, smart people to call on for help.
So what's the timeline for filling both the financial advisory board positions and then the CFO and HR director, which have to come after the board, right?
They can parallel process
Okay.
in the sense that the agreement is more specific about the CFO and the program management director in the sense that I believe it calls for the mayor to create those positions within 7 days after the agreement. And I think it's 30 days as I'm supposed to help submit either a list of candidates or Andy is, I'm sorry, that was one of the modifications from an earlier draft. Andy is supposed to work with the mayor's office on candidates for those 2 positions 30 days following that 7-day period. The advisory board is more open in terms of their time, but we're already starting that process, and I'd like to appoint people as soon as we can line up some good candidates.
Governor, what can you say about the sense that the program manager and the CFO are kind of really going to be running the show?
Not at all. Actually, they are part of the executive office of the mayor, and they have delineated responsibilities. It's really only in the case that there's a failure to implement, where there's a reform default event or a breach in some fashion, do they have more abilities to move forward with the financial advisory board without the mayor or the city council. It's really they're working as part of the mayor's team and with the city council in terms of their day-to-day work unless there's a default of some fashion.
Governor, is there any worry from your end, or Treasurer Dillon from your end, that that there could be a default, that maybe perhaps city council, the mayor, may not get done what is required in this agreement?
Well, what I would say is, and this is one of the problems whenever you do an agreement with someone, a legal agreement of some sort, is I always try to remind people, going back to my old days when I was doing agreements to invest and build companies with people, is too often people get caught up in the negatives because typically a legal agreement is spending all the time talking about situations where things don't work. And as a practical matter, when you do an agreement with someone, when you decide you're working with someone, your goal is to have things work. So the goal here is really to say, hopefully most of those provisions don't mean as much because we're working well together as a team, showing real results. And it's only when things haven't stayed on path do you really have to resort to the agreement as a tool. So what I would say is they're there. It's important that they be there because not this administration or this city council, but if you look at the last 30, 40 years of Detroit, implementation and financial stability have been major challenges. So it's prudent that they're in any agreement where we're partnering together. But the operational method here shouldn't be focusing on how things are going to fail. It should be focusing on how we're working together and showing real results and good things are going on. So I'd just like to remind people of that, because that tends to, again, be a psychological problem when you go through all these agreements. It doesn't talk about, other than the last appendix, about good things going on, and these are better services.
Can you give me a...
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing, though. I think 80% of what's in the reform annex was the city's. I mean, it's not like we've micromanaged, what they got to do to fix the city. There's a few things we added, but it's really their plan, and we just wanted to be a resource to give them the talent they need to implement.
In your capacity
Governor, does the CFO, the program manager, have veto power over what the council and the mayor recommend?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah, not until there would be a default, which the city didn't cure, and then it has to be on one of the reform items that is listed in the agreement, and then they have the right to act on their own reporting to the FAB, going around the mayor and council at that point. So if you look at the document, the city council's basically approved the reform initiatives, but the CFO and the project manager will report to the mayor until such time as there may be a default on a particular item.
But is it fair to say that they have veto power?
I would say no.
Governor, how important is it for the city and the labor unions to start sitting down and talking? As you can imagine, the unions are not very happy today. They're meeting privately earlier. They were earlier today. How important is it to that process to get going, and what's your message to them?
Well, we hope people will sit down and come to an agreement. Again, that's always the best goal, is people coming to the table to say, let's move forward in some positive, constructive way, and there should be fairly clear guidance, at least from the perspective of the agreement. There's an appendix now that delineates a number of criteria that should be part of a collective bargaining agreement, and so those are things that they can look at, they can make an assessment, and hopefully people can sit down and talk and come to some conclusion. Because the sooner that could get done, the better.
What was wrong with the concessions that the city and the unions negotiated weeks ago? What was wrong from your perspective with those?
Well, I've been clear about that. There are a number of things, but the two areas I point out in particular, one is the issue of long-term liabilities. There's more that needed to be done in terms of managing those. And those are things I would look to the state of how we did our collective bargaining agreement. We made reforms there that are working, plus the legislation that took place at the state level to deal with some of those. The second piece is the work rules piece in particular, that more flexibility was needed, and I would say that if you looked at most of the labor agreements for, say, the state of Michigan or other jurisdictions, they're more flexible than the ones the city has had because of some of the reform opportunities. flexibility is important. Now, I'll give you one illustration. Say, for example, they asked for help on payroll systems. The city could use more help on new ways to do things. We're happy to help them find good payroll systems that work for other municipalities or work for us. And the challenge is how would that go then with work rules in terms of saying you're putting in a new time system? And how fast and quickly could we move with 40-some plus separate agreements versus saying, here's more a consolidated way to look at it with work rules where we want to make sure people get paid appropriately and fairly, but it's under a new system that's going to have to ask people to do something different than what they've always done for the last few decades.
You
Now
talking about
that the agreement has been signed, or not signed, but approved, might there be more cash on the table for the city in some form?
People like to keep on coming back to cash, but I think the agreement outlines the ways we're going to work together, and a number of those involve investment by the state. There's significant resources involved in some of the items that are talked about in the appendix or other programs we already have in place. So we're always having an open dialogue about issues, but again, the agreement outlines the programs we're going to work on together. Vankalate, you had.
what are the economic indicators to demonstrate that the city is getting back to financial solvency once the advisory board is in place? What do you want to see happen? What should happen that should indicate to you that, in fact, yes, they're moving forward in getting the city financially stable?
Well, there's a whole series of those. One thing you'll appreciate is the Financial Advisory Board is supposed to come up with some metrics to publish. We didn't actually call them dashboards, but the same dashboard scorecard kind of concepts we have at the state level should apply at the city. If you look at it, it's the basics. I mean, what's the budget balance between revenues and expenditures, how much cash there is. There's a whole litany of fairly traditional financial metrics that we want to be more transparent with in terms of partnering with the city so they can put them up on their website.
And they've, in this agreement, committed not to overspend their revenues. And, twice a year there'll be a revenue estimating conference. So there's some real teeth in this agreement.
Governor, there are some who look at the Financial Advisory Board and say, okay, you've already got a 9-member city council, now you've got a 9-member super city council, and that getting anything done with a group that large is going to be particularly difficult. Are you at all concerned about the size of that group, because it went from 9 to 7 and back to 9 again? Why 9, and what makes you confident that those 9 people are going to be able to shepherd this all through the way it needs to be?
Yeah, well, again, the city council has a primary role for policy for the city. The Financial Advisory Board's responsibility is primarily financial and then helping oversee the implementation. So it doesn't really create another city council. The city council has primary responsibility as the legislative body of the city. And then in terms of numbers, it's within the reasonable range. If you look at any of these kind of cases where you have a board or a commission or someone providing help in some fashion, 7 to 9 is kind of the traditional range you'd fall in. Sometimes you can see 5. Quite often that might be viewed as too few. If you get above 9 and you get in the teens, then you're going to run into the problem you're talking about most likely.
Governor, I'm going to come back to cash for a second because, as Treasurer Dillon mentioned, there are teeth in this agreement to make sure the city doesn't overspend its revenues. How is that going to be possible without cutting city services?
There'll have to be cuts. If you look at the city of Inkster, there's a 31% reduction in their expenditures. Pontiac, the same thing. Flint is going through it. So there's going to have to be a reduction in spending so that they match their revenues. But the reason we did this recent borrowing is clearly we didn't want them to run short of cash. So they may use about 50 of it, and it would be my hope that the balance stay there for emergencies or to implement some of the reforms that we're working on.
The other thing I would add, though, is that doesn't mean you're not being innovative or actually providing better service. So just because we have to cut the budget or they have to look at cutting the budget in some ways doesn't mean it's at the expense of having worse services. There are ways to be thoughtful and more innovative and, again, creative by working through those. And I'll look at the state as an illustration. One of the things I'm really proud of is the Michigan State Police. We actually asked them to cut their budget as part of the $1.5 billion deficit reduction that we had to do, and they closed over half the state police posts in the state of Michigan. People were not yelling and screaming about that because they did it in a way where they actually made their vehicles their offices. We were able to put over 100+ sergeants and troopers out in the field. So it was a case where we actually reduced the budgetary cost to the state and improved services with more law enforcement serving citizens. So again, that's where the thought process needs to be on not just looking at things the old way, but being innovative about delivering better services at a better value.
Well, can you be more
Yeah, actually, I'd
specific?
like to add one thing to that, too, because, for example, it takes 65 full-time employees to do the payroll for the police department. Just for the police department is 65 FTEs. So there is ways to change the system and improve services at the same time.
Is there any way to predict, though, how many departments may be privatized? How many people may lose their job? That's a real concern in a city where so many people are already unemployed and things of that nature. Any way to predict that?
Well, the city gave us their plan, and that encompasses most of the appendix that you look at about the areas. We didn't come up with that list, the city did, that then Andy's team helped review with them. The other thing I'd say is I never use the word privatize. I don't believe in privatization as a pure concept. We don't use it at the state. It's really to say there are points where you need to be competitive. And so you should competitively bid potentially or look at the best answer, and that should include the people in the city being part of that process when you can, to say, let's not just say it's about privatizing. I don't believe in that. I believe in providing fair opportunity because we're responsible to our taxpayers to give them the best result for the best value.
And again, that's an ongoing work of the City Council and the Mayor. I mean, they have a lot of work to do in looking at structures, departments, and so that work is still going on.
Governor or Mr. Treasurer, is the state going to help the city renegotiate these swap agreement costs that they now face? I mean, it could be several $100 million.
We've done a lot of analysis, and there is some discussion going on between the city and the holders. Treasury's been assisting with that.
Do you feel the stabilization refinancing, that now that once this is approved, the city, this threat of running out of money in May is solved?
Yes.
Okay.
And you feel
So
that...
when this is implemented, we'll have seen that threat lifted at least.
Well, we were forecasting that they would, I think, run about $46 million in the negative between now and June 30. This recent financing we did provided them enough money to avoid that.
But there's still July before some of the property taxes start rolling in. Do you guys feel good about July? How do you feel about that?
Yeah, they'll get healthy again in July and August when the property tax revenues come in.
Governor, can you talk about the signing of the document from your end? Have you signed already, and when is the mayor going to sign it since he's in the hospital?
Yeah, I believe the mayor signed it already. So I think we have all, I don't know if Andy signed it. He's the only signature I'm still I have to ask about.
Was it today?
No, I just got the cities delivered to me this afternoon.
So the clock is ticking on 7 days CFO window.
Governor, what did you learn about the city of Detroit through this experience that you didn't know beforehand?
Just before that, just to finish, Kyle, your question. So I believe, again, the signatures are all coming in, and so this is all coming together in a nice way and very prompt way. So I did sign the cover letter basically back to the city saying that following the review team, there is still a condition of severe financial distress and there is a consent agreement. So if you just ask technically in terms of the 10-day window that I had to comply with, I've signed that letter, and that'll be transmitted back to the city.
So the clock is ticking.
Well, again, this is about positive action now.
Well, what do you expect the 9
I'm sorry, we had a question. Was that
Tim.
Was it Tim?
It was Tim.
Governor, what did you learn going through this experience about the city of Detroit and its people that you didn't know going into this process, sir?
Well, what I found, Tim, is I would say it was a good chance to engage in more dialogue with citizens of Detroit. It's one of those things. We're a big state, but this gave me an opportunity to do a town hall or two, did multiple radio shows, did some great events. Bankalay was the great host at one of those events with Mildred Gaddis. And it was really a chance to have a better first-person dialogue with citizens of Detroit to hear what's really on their mind. And a lot of it just came back to they want better services. And they deserve better services, so I'm happy to say that this agreement is really a catalyst to say better services, financial stability, and let's grow the city.
I've got 2 more in the room.
One question is about the growth side of this plan, Governor. What are the ideas on the table to grow Detroit?
Yeah, a number of them are in the appendix, is Appendix E, I believe. Outlines a number of things that talk about public safety improvements, because if you look at it, it's the fundamentals. You want to improve public safety, you want to improve lighting, you want to improve transit, you want job opportunities, you want better programs for kids. I'm happy to report, I thought Roy Roberts did a great talk yesterday about what's going on with DPS and talking about improvements with Detroit Public Schools. So it's really creating that positive environment because there are a number of good things already going on in the city. So this is to start changing the dialogue from one of saying we're in trouble and what are we going to do just to cut things to saying let's get to stability and let's grow the city. And these are all components of that. And what I would hope to have happen is the city can continue to come out and create more and more a positive vision for what that really looks like. Because that is something I do recommend to the city. I've talked about in the past is too often we spend too much time on the negative and we could use a bigger, brighter, positive vision and how those pieces all tie together for Detroit.
And we'll convene a group of stakeholders in the city to begin to bubble up those ideas because all the stuff you see in Appendix Z are things that we came up with as a state in terms of what we can do now or in a short run. But we would like to get the ideas from the community as well. Folks who are engaged in the city, people who have vested interest in the city, we want their ideas as well.
Is there any concern going forward that you guys put so much time and effort and gave the city council and the leaders here in Detroit so much flexibility, and moving forward when we have more financial emergencies in other cities and other school districts, is going to become a time and energy suck?
Well, again, if you look at the number of communities that have emergency managers or consent agreements, you're talking a handful or so. It's a fairly limited number. And we're continuing to improve our systems. That was part of the benefits of Public Act 4 was a better early warning system, and that's still being fully implemented. It's really to help communities avoid having these issues to begin with. And I'm happy to say I believe the Public Act was very useful, plus a lot of the other reforms we did at the state level in terms of creating more stability for communities to work their way through this, or school districts to work their way back to a positive path. And so we could see a few more communities, but again, I don't want to speculate on that. We're working hard to make sure we're helping the ones that are in these conditions do the best they can and come out of it. And I think we're seeing some good things. Benton Harbor, there's good results going on. Pontiac's come a long way. Flint.
Yeah, of course.
I can't have the last question be something ending in time suck.
How confident are you that there's a lot of legal challenge right now and a lot of question mark around whether Public Act 4 is going to stick? I mean, how confident are you that you can proceed on what needs to be done in Detroit with the legal challenges that are hanging over this seemingly new legal challenge over there?
Well, we've had a lot of legal challenges. I can't think of any successful legal challenges. So that's the way I would put that, in the sense that it's part of our society. It's, people can litigate, and that's part of the process. They haven't been successful, and I hope we can continue on this path, because I thought it was good, thoughtful legislation to begin with, that we're working in good faith to really make sure our communities are successful, because it's all about partnering. The state's role isn't to run any community or any school. It's really to be a supportive partner to allow them to be successful, because the answer is about growing our state again and growing our communities. And the good part is if you stop and look at where the state of Michigan is, and you look back a year, I mean, a lot of these, we faced a big deficit. We had a lot of difficult issues, but now look a year later. Look at where unemployment is, how it's improved. We're adding jobs to the workforce. Many other metrics are in a positive way. Personal income went up the best since the year 2000. People are becoming more optimistic. And we just need that to spread to all Michigan. And so we want communities like Detroit, Flint, Pontiac, the ones that have been suffering the most, to be participants and actually, if anything, grow faster than the rest of the state average. Because that's the way it should happen in terms of communities coming back, once you get the right conditions all in place. And this was a big step in doing that. So that's where I view this as hopefully one of the key steps in the solution for Detroit, not the problem of Detroit.
Thank you, Governor.
Governor, what is the